Okay, great. So good morning everyone, and welcome to today's webinar in the series Innovative Public Procurement in Action, Exploring Instruments for Urban Transformation. And it's the fifth and last webinar in this webinar series. And today we'll explore the final instrument named Pre-Commercial Procurement. And you know me, but I'm Sarah Nyberg and I will be your host. And I don't need to present myself, and I think you know about URBREATH as well. I'll just repeat some housekeeping for the webinar. So please be muted unless you want to ask questions or contribute to the discussion after the presentation by Francesco. You can choose yourself if you want to have your camera on or off. It's nice to see some faces to see if you're following along and see your reactions. So feel free to turn on your cameras. But we're recording the sessions and we'll share it afterwards. So I understand if you might not want to have your camera on. So the objective of this webinar today is that you will learn about pre-commercial procurement and that we can discuss and have an exchange about it and to learn from each other how it can be applied. And today we'll also compare it to the other procurement instruments which we have gone through the last weeks to see how it's similar or also different from the other instruments. And the structure of the webinar is as usual. First we have the introduction and context of today's webinar. Then we'll have a technical deep dive by Francesco Molinari to understand the instrument. Then we'll have time for your questions and we'll make our best to respond to them. After that, we have an interactive part to discuss the pros, cons, and the relevance of the instrument for NBS procurement in cities. And then we'll finish with a summary, final remarks, and and then that was it. So before we dive into the instrument, I want to give you a bit of the context of this webinar. So I'll not present URBREATH since it seems like all of you know URBREATH, but I'll show the collaborative procurement framework, which I know can be quite new for you and which kind of is a frame for the webinar of or for the webinar series. So I will share these slides. Yep. So first then exactly. So for procurement of NBS in cities, which is the focus of URBREATH, so for that, you can use collaborative, holistic procurement models. And so while most cities follow the standard procurement procedures, there are options to reduce cost, increase innovation, and have more sustainable projects using collaborative, holistic procurement models. And so what do we mean by collaborative and holistic? So collaborative means that we involve stakeholders from the start of a project or a process. And holistic is that you start with your end goal in mind and consider the entire life cycle of the project, from design to planning to implementation and ongoing maintenance. So it's a combination of this which means the collaborative holistic procurement models. And just a note, there are procurement rules which need to be followed, which you might be aware of, but there is room for innovative approaches, and especially for those which the EU has described, which are the 5 ones we're going through in this webinar series. So first then, so here's really the overview of the collaborative procurement framework for urban NBS. So first of all, we have co-creation. So it can mean that it's a participatory design of NBS solutions, like you involve other stakeholders. For example, you include citizens or all other stakeholders so that they can take better ownership. And then it's also that the public works together with the inhabitants or with the companies instead of just buying something, which usually is the case. And then the core are the different innovative approaches to the actual procurement. And here we have these 5 different instruments, which we have gone through the last weeks. So first, it's preliminary market consultation, then it's competitive dialogue, then competitive procedure with negotiation, innovation partnerships, and pre-commercial procurement, which is the instrument that we will go through today. And then the third pillar of this framework is innovative approaches to financing. And here I'll not go in depth, but I'll just mention some possible approaches. There are definitely more. One is to highlight returns and use that for proposals to show more like the different benefits and co-benefits of urban NBS, to show that for possible financiers to get more funding. You can also combine and bundle NBS projects, which are usually not commercial. You combine them with commercial financeable sub-projects so that it can be like a cross-financing from this commercial financeable sub-projects can kind of give money to the NBS projects, which usually doesn't generate income, like just a tree standing there or just a park per se doesn't really give an income. You can also work with reducing costs in different ways, and you can also combine sources and forms for innovative financing. So not only rely on one source or one form of financing, but combine different sources and or different forms of financing. So yeah, we hope that we can inspire you through this webinar series and including the last webinar today to use or to try to apply this collaborative, holistic procurement framework. And at least try out one or several of these innovative procurement approaches. And that's also why we're sharing information about that in this webinar series and have a discussion on them. And I'll repeat it in the end, but we're happy to be in contact with you in case you need any support or so to use these approaches. So I will stop sharing here and let me just check if I want to say something more. Yeah, no, I think that was all for my side for the introduction. So yeah, with that said, I'll give the word to Francesco Molinari, who will present what PCP or pre-commercial procurement is and also compare it with other innovative approaches. Over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. Very inspiring, at least to me, on a Monday morning at 9 a.m. This is, like you said, the last presentation. To some extent, there are repetitions, even in the coming slides, but considering that there is the intention to share this presentation openly on social media and other sources of information, I think you will pardon me for that. Especially today, we are taking distance anyway from the direction of the previous 4 rounds of this webinar series, as the instrument we are talking about holds peculiarities which make it so unique that even the usual search for existing examples, as I will tell you, has given a collection of projects rather than finalized procurement experiments. This is to bear in mind, considering that our intention is not to present any of these instruments as they are, but consider them in relation with the broader aim that you nicely outlined, Sarah, in your introduction, to reflect on the potential of these instruments for the sake of procurement of nature-based solutions. So today, this instrument will be considered from a perspective that takes some distance from the one that is common to the other four previous instruments, just as a reminder, but I will mention them again. The preliminary market consultations, which are preparatory to procurement exercises, and then the competitive dialogue, the competitive procedure with negotiation, and last week, the innovation partnership. This last instrument holds some elements in common with pre-commercial procurement, but as you will notice, the deviations here are very, very significant. And first and foremost, let me specify upfront that the goal of this instrument is no longer to procure in the sense of purchasing finalized, well-defined products, services, works, but it is more in the domain of procuring R&D services, leading to the delivery of these goods, works, services as prototypes, but with the precise impediment to finalize a purchase. And I will be back on this, but I believe it's already something worth mentioning here on this slide, considering that in the Q&A round, as it is customary for this webinar series, I will ask you for your opinion on the pros and cons of this instrument for the sake of MBS procurement. We started with this picture, which has been repeated every time in the different presentations of the various instruments, to highlight the variety of the typologies of nature-based solutions we know from the state of the art. We used this slide to highlight the diversities, which are considerable, as you can see, and also to prepare the ground for a reflection on replicability. What is indeed replicable in this context, in the context of procuring nature-based solutions, considering that the schema that is prevalent in the URBREATH project, but also adopted in many other comparable examples, is based on the creation of two groups of procurers. The first group, in this case, cities, running first, and then a second group which can take inspiration up to the point of replicating experience and trying to adapt solutions that were already procured in the group of front runners to their own specificities at local level. This is not an obvious process. It holds more complexities than any other. And so our reflection across the 5 instruments has been to suggest what could be really helpful and take distance from what is not probably on top of the options that one can think of adopting. Everything under the big label of knowledge sharing. And as I was discussing with Sarah before the start of this last webinar, I will refrain from trying to draw too many lessons from the experience. There is room for maybe a short publication that summarizes all the learnings from these experiences. The previous picture has been, as you can see, a bit changed to highlight what I was already mentioning in my introduction. While the typologies of nature-based solutions can well stay the same, what we are definitely looking for in this case, in the case of pre-commercial procurement, is R&D services, research and development services, leading to the prototyping and testing of new and innovative versions, new and innovative applications, new and innovative items belonging to these huge typologies and other typologies which are not in the picture, with the common element that these items should not exist already in the state of the art, should not be commonly available as replicable and immediately configurable or deployable products. To be honest, it is quite difficult in general, at least to me, to draw the line between solutions that exist but they have never been deployed in that way, in that specific location, and solutions that are really new. Nobody has ever seen them before. However, this distinction here is vital. There could be a compromise between the two definitions when we were speaking about the innovation partnership. In this case, it is compulsory, and I will explain to you in which sense that we adopt the strict definition of something that is not belonging yet to the state of the art. Pre-commercial procurement is not regulated. It doesn't stay within the scope of the European directive. It is something that pertains to high-level agreements among countries, including non-European countries, which were formalized many years ago at the level of the WTO, the World Trade Organization. These agreements, which have the purpose of facilitating and promoting competition worldwide, including by the use of public procurement, had defined a special exemption from the strict regulations of procurement law every time research and development services are involved. This is why it is so important to have a definition of nature-based solutions specifically that is confirmed to be about items that don't exist yet on the market. What you see on the left-hand side of this picture, which is very famous, it was introduced in a communication of the European Commission in 2007, which is still the main reference source for pre-commercial procurement, especially at the pragmatic level. The first thing you should notice is this black column, which is drawing a distinction between the pre-commercial and the commercial level. So what we have been talking about until last time were instruments of procurement allowing buyers to purchase goods, works, services to a great extent already belonging to the state of the art and only customized, reconfigured, adapted for the deployment in the specific area of deployment according to the tender in question. This is the orange part of this slide. And it is obviously the domain of an open and transparent and inclusive procedure where several companies can compete in the same environment to offer the best value for money. The pre-commercial procurement stays on the left-hand side. And as you can see, it is structured in 3 phases, which are all parts of the implementation. The first phase is the definition of a solution which has to be designed because it doesn't belong yet to the state of the art. So we are between the ideation phase, which can come before, can belong to the research and development activities that are carried out, for example, in laboratories or in the garage of some startup entrepreneur. And then there is this first phase, which is financed by the instrument, involving, as you can see, several companies, several participants, moving the product idea to the level of solution design. Very importantly, these companies are competitors with one another. They do not share the ideas or the proposals for solutions when they start the interaction with the buyer. So each of those entities provides its own design for a specific solution. And then there is this first dotted line, the transition between phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 2 is about prototyping, so the concrete execution of research and development activities which give form, concrete form, to the design of the solutions that was done in the previous stage. And as you can see here, there are 2 companies, A and B, which do not move to the next stage. This means that here there is a sort of evaluation done by the buyer, done by the procurer, of the quality of what was delivered by company A and B, which evidently did not conform to the initial expectations, and I will be back on the concept of expectations. So 3 companies are left, and then the third phase, after the prototype of each of the 3 solutions has been delivered, is about testing the prototypes in a field environment with the support of the buyer itself. And again, you can see that the number of prototypes goes down from 3 to 2. Company D is not asked to go to the field stage, and only the last 2 remaining companies produce tested products after this additional trial phase. And then, as I mentioned, there is a barrier. So the process stops here. There is no purchase of a final product, but it is implicit that the level of maturity of the tested solutions for company C and company E is not sufficiently high, the level of maturity, to allow installation as if they were products, services, works well refined as after the finalization of an alternative procurement procedure. So company C and company E, in this case, they will compete with maybe company X, a new company that was not part of the process before, and even with D, B, and A, who may have had the time between now and the time when the commercial tender is launched to refine their prototypes up to the level of competing or being able to compete again for the acquisition of a contract. This schema is not prescriptive, but due to the complexity of the topic itself, it has been adopted quite widely in the past 18 years in practically all the numerous tests that were done by public entities adopting the model and launching experiments in a wide variety of domains. So, despite its non-prescriptive nature, the closest analogy to the PCP process is this picture. And like I said, it is not possible to find legal definitions around because the procedure is not regulated. So this reference among squared brackets to Article 14 of the Directive on Procurement may be a bit deceiving for you because you will not find there any reference to public procurement. I will present the text and I will comment it shortly. But it is another way of saying that the law, the procurement law, doesn't want to take any initiative to influence the shaping of this procedure, with the only important exception of the general principles of procurement law, transparency, inclusiveness, parity of treatment, and so on, which must be respected by every public procedure, including this one. So let's try to understand again, because these slides were also presented last time when speaking about the innovation partnership, the differences between the first two instruments, apart from the preliminary market consultation, which doesn't lead to a purchase, and these other two instruments, where the important difference is that also the innovation partnership leads to a purchase or may lead to a purchase if the final specifications of the product, service, work being developed are sufficiently close to be final, and the pre-commercial procurement. In these two instruments, we started by saying that we talk about existing solutions. Again, defining what an existing nature-based solution is can be a challenging task. Let's say that the best proxy for this can be a collection of tender specifications, especially technical specifications, which can be available because, for example, someone else has already procured a similar solution in the past. However, and recognizing the complexity and the difficulty of streamlining these specifications, these two instruments allow something that the competitive dialogue names dialogue or discussion, and the other instrument names negotiation. Practically speaking, a bilateral interaction between the buyer and each and every participant in the procedure, with the aim of getting information from the participants, which can be used by the buyer in two ways. First, to refine and in some cases revise the initial specifications. And second, to make sure that what comes up in the competitive dialogue, we are not yet in a tendering situation, so we are not yet looking at a bid, while in the competitive procedure in negotiation, we have the technical bid in front of our eyes. In any case, the other companion goal is to make sure that whatever comes up is adapted or tailored to the best possible extent to the requirements of the buyer. In this other part of the slide, we talk about innovation partnership and pre-commercial procurement. We talk about new solutions that don't exist yet. Solutions that need to be developed and, in the case of the innovation partnership, can be purchased at the end of the process. And here we are back with the two definitions on which it is really hard, at least to me, to take a clear stance. What is new to the state of the art or the market, and or what is new to the buyer, because it was never installed in that way with that specific configuration at the procurer's site. We can say, based on experience, based on strict reading of what is in the procurement law, that what is new to the state of the art may go to the innovation partnership, but should preferably go to the PCP, the topic, the instrument we are talking about now, while new to the buyer should stay out of the procedure we are presenting today. This is something that can put you on the safe side, and considering that in both cases we are speaking about R&D services, research and development services, prototyping and testing services, it is highly recommendable that the initial specifications we start from, contrary to what happens in the two instruments on the left-hand side, they should be very loose, in the sense of preferably not including too much in terms of technical features and a lot more in terms of expected performance and therefore benefits that the solution, whatever it is, whatever comes up, should bring to the procurer. So, putting this in another way, the target of the instruments on the left-hand side are off-the-shelf solutions where complexity is what prevents us from considering them like pre-designed packages, as in the case of buying serial products. I need to buy computers. It is quite easy to create a collection of technical specifications irrespective of the brand I am thinking of while launching the tender. On the right-hand side, we have novel or experimental solutions which require prototyping and iterative testing before being finalized. Then, the separation between R&D and purchase is optional. In the case of the innovation partnership, it is compulsory in the case of pre-commercial procurement, for the reasons I explained, and I also can come back to if there are additional questions. In this slide and in the following one, for those of you who were in the previous webinar, this should be familiar to you. I made examples of items that could be purchased through the first two instruments on the left-hand side of the previous slide, and examples belonging to this domain, the domain of today. I will present two cases of two running or one running and one expected to run project where we stay at a very high level. So these definitions are already very specific, and probably what pertains to the two case studies I will be presenting to you stays at a very, at even a higher level. But this is intuitively correct, because you remember the first phase of the PCP in the slide I presented to you coming from the European Union's communication. There are several initial competitors in phase one, the phase of moving from idea to concept and design. So it is perfectly acceptable that different approaches to fulfill the requirements in the description are adopted by different competitors. Even at a higher level, like I told you, we could also forget to some extent, or to a great extent, about the descriptions and stay focused on the procurement objectives, which have to do with the expected performances of those new and experimental nature-based solutions which we may want to promote. So how does it work practically? Nothing different from the previous examples. It's a sort of restricted procedure. So there is an initial call with the publication of minimum requirements and selection criteria. Then, according to the criteria, the candidates are shortlisted and the final bids are submitted. From then on, contract implementation starts. Two comments here. First comment, I will repeat that, but like in the case of the innovation partnership, even here, it is quite reasonable to anticipate that the selection criteria will be very loose. This because we are looking for innovators, and innovators include that special category of players which we name startups, and therefore players interested in changing the world to some extent with their activities, rather than going around and competing with existing incumbent companies on marginal improvements of the solutions that already exist. So it is very reasonable that the selection criteria will not be highly dependent on turnovers, past jobs of the same kind already performed in the past, and all this kind of stuff. It is more reasonable that the criteria will be loose, still a bit tight, to avoid the participation of entities which, for example, may not have the capacity to perform the activities in case the contract is awarded to them. Second comment, the criterion for awarding the tender is the MIT principle, the most economically advantageous tender. This means the best ratio between value in the sense of quality and price. So value for money, if you want to put it in another way. This is common to the innovation partnership, but in other instruments there are deviations. For example, the competitive procedure renegotiation can be awarded with only the reference to price instead of referencing to quality. At which stage do we locate the instrument of pre-commercial procurement? Between tendering and contracting. This is due to the iterative implementation phase, which comes back to an evaluation which is done in installments, not to reduce the number of participants across the different phases of implementation. For the other parts, the main aspects are that there is no negotiation of received bids, contrary to what happens in the other three instruments. Evaluation, I already mentioned, is done according to the MIT principle. And very importantly, the procedure must be finalized with at least 2 bidders surviving to it, as it was described in the picture I commented before. That is not an optional requirement. It is a mandatory requirement. Why is this so? Because of the pre-commercial nature of the procedure, because of the fact that this is not regulated. It is aimed at promoting competition, including in the market of nature-based solutions. So we are forced, in this case, to land into a scenario where at least 2 distinct solutions must survive. I don't have time to go into details, but it is not unusual that 2 distinct solutions are appreciated as the outcome of a procedure like this. Think of the example I made last time, speaking of the innovation partnership for the city of Amsterdam, looking for alternative ways of maintaining or restoring the walls of their canals. I think a procedure like this might be helpful, especially to identify alternative solutions to solving to the problem that is stated, which might be adopted independently. And in fact, from the Netherlands, the very first example of the commercial procurement, even before it was named as such, was referring to the issue of predicting floods in the canals, which are not only limited to the urban perimeter of Amsterdam, but are very widespread all across the territory of the Netherlands. 2 distinct technologies were identified, one based on satellite monitoring, the other based on sensor deployment to monitor water level. Both technologies were successful in the pilot area they were asked to experiment, and both technologies gave life to separate and distinct initiatives that were successful on the market. So this is pretty much in line with the vision behind the instrument, which is, of course, quite distant from our vision in this project, more focused, as Sarah nicely said, to creating opportunities for collaborative procurement, which can ultimately bring value to what the buyer, the city in this case, considers as priority. Comparing with the innovation partnership, just a reminder, because I already said all, the tendering process is pretty much the same. Negotiation only occurs in the innovation partnerships. Both use the MIT principle. Only the innovation partnership can award a single bidder, PCP at least 2. Tendering alternates with implementation, and there is no feedback to the planning stage. PCP cannot lead to a purchase, IP can. Historically, I can also run here because I mentioned that already. The PCP was introduced and described by this communication of the European Commission. After that, pilot implementations have been done in several domains. After those implementations, it was felt that it was not completely clear that this procedure was deregulated. And to that purpose only, we have Article 14 of the European Directive of Procurement, which dates 7 years after the publication of the communication in question. The main goal of the article is to exclude PCP from the scope of application of the directive. Same have done national legislations which have adhered to the same approach. What does the article say? It's a very short article which needs a bit of interpretation. It is entitled Research and Development Services, so doesn't even mention pre-commercial procurement, and it focuses on the field or scope of application for the directive, which refers to services covered by these codes. These are specific codes for the definition of the nature of the items being purchased, and these codes correspond, as per an international convention, to the research and development services we were talking about. But then it puts two conditions which are integral to the definition of the scope of the directive. So this article must be read in the negative. Those public service contracts for research and development which do not fulfill these two conditions are those covered by the scope of pre-commercial procurement. So let's put the negative into these two bullet points and read them in that way. The benefits do not accrue exclusively to the contracting authority for its use in the conduct of its own affairs. It's the reverse of what is in the article. This means that there must be additional benefits from the PCP to the ordinary purpose of the procedure, which do not go to the contracting authority, do not go to the buyer. To whom do they go? To the supplier. There is no other party in the procedure than the supplier. So the benefits must also go to the supplier. Second bullet point, the service provided is not wholly remunerated by the contracting authority. So if the value of the service is 100, the contracting authority can legitimately pay less than 100 for that service for research and development. This is the title of the article. If you remember, those of you who were in this room, there was a strange paragraph in the article of the directive referring to innovation partnerships, where this concept or principle of full remuneration was reiterated. So we can identify another element of distinction here between the innovation partnership and the PCP, being the partial remuneration of the value of the services, which is peculiar of the PCP. And how do we interpret this clause? Why is this so important? If you go to the communication of the European Commission describing the PCP, there you will see it very well described. It's the concept of risk and benefit sharing. In other words, this instrument being focused on R&D services, being focused on the prototyping and testing of nature-based solutions, in our case, which do not exist in the state of the art, assumes as a very likely outcome that the activities inherent are so complex and so risky that they will not lead to any outcome. Not leading to any outcome means that the prototype doesn't work. The prototype doesn't have a concrete value which can justify its transformation into a commercial product or service. So the PCP introduces the principle that the risk of failure must be shared between the supplier and the buyer. And the best way, there are other ways, but I cannot talk too much. The best way to signify that the risk is shared is that the division between benefits and remunerations is done in a different way. Which way? If the service provided is not remunerated in full, this means that the public authority, in this case, contributes to financing an R&D job which stays within the range not only of expertise, but also of business interest for the company participating in the procedure. We might say that because of their presence, role, profile in the market, the company in question is interested, might be interested per se in developing these new solutions which do not exist yet. So the financial contribution given by the price of the tender helps reduce the risk because it reduces the cost of developing something that has no real market value. The fact that the benefits are split to some extent can be read in this way. There are other ways, but I don't have time. That, of course, if the prototype works, the buyer will have all the interests in purchasing it because it will be a prototype that has been tested in real conditions within the scope of the PCP in the specific field and area of experimentation. On the other hand, given the impossibility of immediately purchasing the product, there must be other ways to provide feedback that is positive for the contracting authority. And these other ways are normally included in the PCP documentation. They can be about royalties, which the company, remember, we are in the case that the prototype has been successfully deployed. If the company continues with engineering the product and wins commercial calls for tender, a small share of every piece installed or sold may come back to the contracting authority. In return for this, the contracting authority dispenses the company from the continuous engagement in all the upcoming strategies for commercialization. It would be nonsense because the contracting authority is a public entity, but it could be in principle realized in other ways. So what the company gets in return for the royalties from the contracting authority is the possibility of commercializing the product, what comes up from the PCP freely, discretionally, and maybe recognizing special conditions, like I said, including royalties, but this could also be about special conditions in the maintenance of what has already been provisionally installed, and other special cases which, as you can imagine, vary a lot from case to case. Why is this, or may this be useful in the case of nature-based solutions? This is a bit difficult because of the distance, as you can now perceive, of the instrument from all the other previous three. Anyway, I've tried to figure out 4 reasons. The first is also common to the innovation partnership. We are dealing with the results of research and innovation activities, which is something that can be common to many nature-based solutions whenever they require new approaches to solve known problems. So the PCP is perfect in that case. And second point, point 2, can be particularly interesting for the buyer because it forces to keep R&D separate from purchase. It was an option in the innovation partnership. Now it is obligatory to close the procedure and maybe launch another call for tender to give continuity or expand geographically or thematically the scope of the previous research and innovation activity. The third element is the risk and benefit sharing I mentioned. This is also something we can speculate as common maybe to all the previous procedures. In the competitive dialogue, collaboration is more located at the level of jointly figuring out the specifications for a future technical offer. In the competitive dialogue, it is more about discussing about the details of a technical offer to improve it. In the innovation partnership, it is more about collaborative first negotiation and then implementation. In this case, like I said earlier, there is a real sharing of a sort of business-oriented vision, which makes the contracting authority interested in the success of the experiment, not only because it may fulfill specific needs related with the essence of the problem, maybe the problem of flooding or drafts as it was described in previous presentations, but also because collaboration can continue with different terms after the end of the procedure if the prototype developed has been demonstrated to be particularly promising in the perspective of commercial distribution. And finally, this is also common to the innovation partnership, we can speculate that the selection criteria for the participants can be less binding, which opens up to the participation of players which are not the usual suspects and therefore may be aggregated for the first time to a procedure which gives them impulse, in this case, to creating additional products by the execution of R&D activities. I think I can skip this because I already commented it in detail, starting from the image proposed by the European Commission. This is exactly the same schema. What I can add, since we didn't speak too much of preliminary market consultations in this presentation today, is that while the use of a PMC is to a great extent optional, although recommended, in all the previous cases of instruments I described, you can imagine that in the case of the PCP, it is extremely necessary, because it is only through a preliminary market consultation, it's only through listening to the market that you can get sufficient information to realize, first of all, whether the solutions you are looking for stay within or outside the technology frontier, the state of the art in the market, and then decide whether to continue with this process or choose another instrument which may have a different dynamics when it comes to tendering and implementation. This is my last slide before the examples. To summarize the pros and cons, we can say that PCP is ideal for R&D projects dealing with solutions that are not in the state of the art. There is this risk-benefit sharing between buyer and seller, which can add additional interest to the contracting authority. More openness. Oops. Can you mute yourselves, please? It is more open to small-sized and emergent solution providers, and there is no obligation to purchase the results. On the other hand, it is time and resource intensive, also considering that, like I said, R&D may lead to nothing. It requires strong governance capacity and technical expertise, may end up into results that are insignificant or useless, and in any case, it shifts the focus away from the buyer's own purposes, which include the definition of bespoke MBS for their specific sites, away from this towards a broader aim, which is connected with pushing ahead the technology frontier for the solutions we are looking for. And this is well exemplified by these two examples, none of which refers to a finalized procedure in the domain of nature-based solutions. Then in other domains, there's plenty of evidence of successful cases. This is a project that is running. It is named PCP-WISE. It's funded by the Horizon Europe program. It targets 5 application domains, which include rural and urban sites from various climatic areas of the continent. And its aim is to use Earth observation data to strengthen climate resilience against floods, fires, and enhance the quality of infrastructures for water management. There is a call under preparation, which follows a successful round of PMCs, which helped identify relevant challenges and possible solution ideas. Existing concepts include the deployment and monitoring of nature-based solutions for water retention, flood risk reduction, landscape scale vegetation management, and ecosystem-based adaptation across the rural and urban context represented in the consortium. The second example is not even a project. It is a call of the Horizon Europe program launched in May and still open for submission, although I believe that the 29th of October is too close if you haven't yet started to work at an application. Anyway, the call specifically addresses the issue of R&D and innovation in green roofs, like in this image, green walls, and integrated climate-proofing systems for public buildings. To show again that the goals of these experiments may be broader than just fulfilling specific needs for customization, the applicants will be required to demonstrate concrete evidence of market inadequacy and specific performance improvement targets, ensuring that the PCP intervention addresses genuine innovation challenges. So it's a bit like the preliminary market consultation to presenting a proposal under this call. The call, in fact, requires that the creation of jobs, sustainable economic growth, and new businesses is an integral part of the application, which is expected to involve a group of joint procurers. So as you can see, we are really using the MBS instrumentally for purposes that are far broader than those limited to a public procurement experiment to solve a specific issue in a specific area of a city. Anyway, I think it's important that we keep our minds open because these goals are also implicit in the strategic use of procurement, especially innovative procurement, which is recommended in each and every description of the instruments I commented in the previous editions of this webinar. I am done. I was probably a bit too long, but I hope I have been clear in this presentation. Otherwise, there is now room for questions and comments. Thank you very much, and the floor goes to Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, very detailed presentation, but I think it was very good and got to learn a lot about PCP and comparison between or towards other instruments, and good to hear about some examples as well. So yeah, thank you for your presentation, Francesco. Exactly. Now it's the floor is open for any questions that you might have. So anyone is welcome to just unmute yourself and ask a question to Francesco or about the presentation. Otherwise, yeah, you can raise your hand or also write in the chat if you're not able to speak out loud. So yeah, I'll wait a few moments. Maybe you need to think a bit about what you're thinking about. Just let us know if you have any questions. Otherwise, it can also be like comments if anyone wants to share any remarks or reflections on Francesco's presentation. Okay, or maybe, oh, you're muted, Francesco, if you want to say something.
Yes, sorry, yes. While you are thinking, I will share the slide on the 3 points I included in my first slide, asking you guys to comment on the contents of this presentation, if it was convincing, if you agree or disagree with the main argument that PCP can be very beneficial in the local adaptation of nature-based solutions through public procurement of innovation. Second, do you agree or disagree with which items of the list of pros and cons provided? Do you have any additional items to suggest for good or bad? And finally, do you have any personal experience to share? And are you more or less convinced of the usefulness and viability of the PCP now than before this webinar started?
Yeah.
I don't know if there is anyone wanting to break the ice here.
Exactly. If you come up with any questions or comments on the presentation later, you can just feel free to share that. Otherwise, if you know something, if you want to say something on one of these three questions, please let us know. Possibly we can start with the first question. So to hear from you, yeah, do you think the presentation was convincing? And yeah, do you also agree or not that PCP can be beneficial for NBS implementation? So what do you think? I mean, I can just start to say something. I mean, I believe that it definitely, I mean, since some NBS solutions are for sure innovative, I believe like some kind of water treatment systems or so, they can definitely be innovative, and therefore PCP can be useful as opposite to like some kind of normal parks or like tree planting is not as innovative. So there, I think PCP is not as useful, but can be somehow, yeah. But there are for sure some which are more innovative, like these also, as you mentioned, the like green facades or green rooftops, or also some type of permeable pavements. I mean, they already exist in the market, but maybe there are some other new type of permeable payments that might need some more R&D. So yeah. Yeah, Vasu, go ahead.
Hi, sorry for the interruption before. I think that PCP indeed is a very useful process, and it indeed can be combined with PPI projects. Maybe it should be something, a small part, because excuse me, you have to start with small scale projects or maybe a small part of bigger projects because it's definitely something innovative and it's out of the beaten path. It's off the beaten path. So for public administration is a new concept and it's hard to adapt.
Mm. Yeah,
But
thanks for sure.
But for small projects to test the concept, it could be very useful and it should be incorporated in the strategy of public procurement.
Yeah. Yeah, good to hear. Yeah, thanks. Good to hear that you think it can be useful. But yeah, I understand it's new, so you need to learn it. So yeah, also sounds good with to apply it on a smaller, yeah, as you said, smaller project or a pilot project or something like that
Yes.
to learn from
Yes.
that and then use it in a better project a bit later on.
Yes.
Mm. Any other thoughts on this first question? Otherwise, we can see, we can go to the next question or discussion about the pros and cons. And so maybe if you, Francesco, can switch to the slide with the pros and cons,
Sure.
or the benefits, then we can see, then we have that in front of us exactly here and can see. So if you, yeah, I know the participants, if you have, what do you think about the benefits and risks? Do you have anything more to add? Do you think something is not a big benefit or a big risk or a small risk? So I'm just happy to hear your thoughts on the benefits and risks or pros and cons of PCP. Yeah, maybe here just reflecting what Vaso said, that it's, yeah, since it's time and resource intensive, like the risk, and it requires strong governance capacity. Yeah, that's actually a reason for, okay, but then you can start small, like then it's maybe less time resource intensive, and you learn how to do that governance capacity. And therefore, like in that way, you can mitigate the risk by starting with a smaller project, perhaps.
Yes, clearly.
It's maybe just a comment from my side, like the third risk there may end up to insignificant or useless results. Yeah, I guess that's always a risk. Like you have to live with that, so to speak. But I think it's the benefits. I think that's no argument of not doing it. It's just good to be aware of it. But yeah, it can be good to be aware of. And I think the fourth point is rather, yeah, just something to be good to be aware about, that, okay, it's maybe shifts the focus away from your, like the municipalities by your own purposes to the aim of like pushing the technology, supporting R&D. But I mean, it's also great if a municipality wants to support R&D, and hopefully, I mean, you get something out of it in the end anyway. So I think that the risks really can be mitigated or being kind of, yeah, just good to be aware about. Anyone who has any other comments on the benefits and risks? I don't know, if not, we can check the last question. I think it was about if you have any personal experience to share. If you have done PCP before, like ideally in an urban environment for NBS, but we know that's not very common, not yet at least. So, but maybe to hear from you if you have used PCP for a non-NBS project, just any other type of project in your municipality, or just to hear, have you ever heard about PCP before, or is it something super new to you? Would just be nice to hear some comments from your experience. If you're a city, or also if you're not representing a city, that's also fine. Just to hear, yeah, what do you know about PCP from before? Some examples, or just in general. And Francesca, if you want, you can go to the discussion slide. Or also we can be forward looking. If you don't know about such examples from before, we can be more forward looking. Like, do you think that PCP can be used in the future? Like, do you feel a bit inspired to use PCP? Do you think it could be possible to use in your city or so? That could also be nice to hear. It's quiet today. Um, yeah, well, I'm not gonna force anything. We're also getting closer to the end, so I can start wrapping up. If something comes to your mind, just raise your hand, but we can slowly start wrapping up for today. So just some summary of the insights I got is, like, one key point is that PCP is not regulated, so there are no legal definitions. It's just like based on the communication by the European Commission, and it's like an agreement between different countries worldwide. So PCP doesn't exist only in Europe, but in other countries as well. Then we learned about the different phases of the PCP. For example, that the competitors in the first phase don't share solutions with each other, but they are really competitors. In a later phase, really tested in the field, but it's still kind of early stage. We need to know that the commercial tender is launched only after the PCP. So PCP is different to the previous instruments. It's really before the actual like commercial tendering of the contracting authority or of the authority. We also learned a bit more that the selection criteria are loose, and that allows, for example, startups and scale-ups to be part of it, because these more innovative solutions might come from startups which don't have so much experience from other projects, so it's good to give them the chance to participate. Also note that there is no negotiation of the received bids for PCP. We heard about the directive from 2014 that kind of implicitly mentions PCP, like we can understand some things from PCP from there, but it doesn't mention PCP directly. And then, yeah, there's more, of course, yeah, just a final comment on the like summary. We know that the R&D is separate from the purchase of the results. And yeah, there's shared risks among the participants. You can use preliminary market consultations before any of these instruments. It is especially recommended before PCP. So yeah, that's what we learned today. Yeah, so this is the last and fifth webinar in the series of these 5 webinars. If you missed any of the previous webinars, or if you would like to share them with your colleagues, they're on YouTube, and where also this recording will be uploaded. So I'm just sharing the link in the chat to URBREATH so they find the recordings. And yeah, we're also happy to connect and collaborate and support you. If you're not already in contact with us through URBREATH, I'm pasting our email addresses here. If you want to contact us. And yeah, maybe just giving the word to Francesca if you have any final words, something you want to say before we finish.
I remember people who attended practically all of the 5 webinars. We stressed a bit ironically that they were scheduled at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning for 5 consecutive weeks. So let me thank you all from my perspective. I have experienced always an average of more than 10 participants every time. And even if the feedback was not so intense, I register from the continuity of attendance that at least there was someone willing to see the end of the movie, and I appreciate that very much. And then, like I said previously, I am interested in assembling, also from my point of view, the outcomes of this initiative into a small report, which you may want to read and comment in your position of URBREATH partners, and maybe decide together to give broader visibility to the final version of that report as one of the dissemination outputs of this project. Thank you again, and I hope to see you around very soon.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you. Yeah, good to hear, Enrico, that you learned something. And yeah, yeah, we really hope that you can use these innovative approaches in your cities. And yeah, let us know if you want to have any support. And yeah, so thank you again all for joining today's webinar. And yeah, we close it here. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Yeah, thank you for joining.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Bye bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.